We still issue, of course, the tropical weather outlook, even when it's quiet. So we're in there looking at the model guidance to see areas of weather that might form over the next couple of days, monitoring the satellite imagery. But on those really quiet days, it's actually often time for us to catch up on other things that are part of our responsibilities, including writing some of the tropical cyclone reports. After each and every storm, different specialists assigned to write the reports on various storms. So it's a chance to catch up on things like that, catch up on other, myself, I do a lot of coordination in the training and outreach and education activities. So even some of that, most of that is focused during the off season. There's still things that start to happen in the fall as we start gearing up towards the off season. Well, let me walk you through, and it might take a little bit of explanation here, but I'll walk you through kind of what happens, and I'll use, they say, the 11 a.m. forecast package as the example. The hurricane forecaster, we work basically 8-hour shifts, so we have a person that's working midnight shift. I'll come in around 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, get my update from that person, what's gone on overnight, what the observations have been, what they changed with the forecast, where the watches and warnings might be, to get me up to speed on what's going on. One of the first things I'll do is actually look at the model guidance that's come in overnight, because most of that actually comes in just after we release the previous advisory. So I'll be looking at the latest runs of the U.S. global model, GFS, and the European model, and start digesting all those model fields, not just the little squiggly lines that a lot of people see. And then the first product that we issue is a tropical weather outlook. So we'll be looking at areas of potential formation over the next 2 to 5 days, and start crafting that product. But also, if we have a system with active watches and warnings, we will issue an intermediate advisory that goes out at 8 a.m. During the summer. So those are the first two things that we're really focusing on right when we get there. But we also start looking at all the data that comes in, helping us to locate the storm. And really, as I really sit down to do a forecast, the first three questions I'm going to ask myself are: one, where is the storm located? How strong is the storm? And how big is the storm? If we're flying aircraft in the storm, we'll have the measurements from the airplane to help determine where it's located, how strong it is. Myself and hopefully we do have 2 hurricane forecasters dedicated to each shift. Now, if there's another storm that's active somewhere else in the Atlantic or East Pacific, we might not both be dedicated to the same storm, but it's nice when we actually only have the one and we both can be dedicated to that, because one person may be looking at this aircraft data that's coming in every several minutes, and let the other person really focus on the forecast. But we'll be looking at all this data coming in. I'll get satellite estimates from a branch that's at the Hurricane Center, the Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch, as well as a group up in Washington, the Satellite Analysis branch, providing estimates of how strong the storm is based on satellite. So I'll put all these pieces together to help me determine where it's located, how strong the storm is, and then also look at the storm size, how far out do the tropical storm force winds extend. And all this is important to initialize the model guidance. And so as soon as I know all those answers, I'll initialize our model guidance. Some of these models take hours to run. It's not a matter of minutes. So some of those will actually be used by the next forecaster, or if it's on the day shift, it'll be used by me in the afternoon to put out the 5 p.m. forecast. But the models that will run overnight and early that morning, it'll now interpolate those models to the current location that I assigned it and motion to produce all those lines you see on those spaghetti plots of the track guidance. And so at that point, then actually we'll sit down and begin to do the forecast. That first process takes anywhere between about half an hour and 45 minutes. So between about 8 a.m. and about 8:30 to 8:45 in the morning. And then for about the next hour or hour and 15 minutes is when I'm really putting together the forecast. And so we'll first make a track forecast. I've looked at the models when I first got there. Now I'll know all the different spaghetti plots, and we'll be making the actual forecast. Once we get the track forecast done, we'll actually make the intensity forecast, and then last we make the size forecast. Once the forecast is actually made, it takes about another 30 to 45 minutes, is then we coordinate the watches and warnings. So at that point, if we need to put up watches and warnings for international countries, we'll actually begin to call the countries, and that's done via phone. If it's within the U.S., we may do a a coordination call with some of the offices, but we also do a planned coordination call about an hour before the advisory is released. And that's when we actually will coordinate all the watches and warnings. We'll also coordinate the hazards. A lot of people don't realize that we actually do real close coordination with the Hydrometeorological Prediction Center, which is now the Weather Prediction Center, up in Washington, because they are the experts on rainfall forecasting. So we'll coordinate the rainfall forecast with them. The Storm Prediction Center if there's a tornado threat. Maybe the Ocean Prediction Center in our group, the Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch, if there's a marine hazard. So we'll coordinate all this on this call, which usually takes between around 10 minutes or so when there's U.S. threat. The storm surge group at the Hurricane Center will also talk about the storm surge forecast. And then once that call is completed is when we really craft the message. This is when we put together the public advisory that contains the hazard information, contains a forecast where the storm is going for the next couple of days, has all the watches and warnings in it, and then we write that discussion, which is really trying to get inside the forecaster's brain, what data sources we use, justifying the forecast, and describe the confidence in that forecast. And during a real significant hurricane threat, oftentimes there's not a lot of time to craft that message because it takes longer to coordinate the watches and warnings, to coordinate the hazards. So sometimes we'll start jotting down some of that message earlier in the process. But we have these strict, firm deadlines.
Yeah.
Everybody at home sitting refresh, and we're frantically trying to get we're frantically trying to get all the products out on time. I know everybody wants it early, and if you'll notice that when a storm is away from land and there's not watches and warnings, we usually do get those out by about half an hour before the deadline. But when there is a significant threat, it just takes longer. We're doing more coordination with international Met services, more coordination within the Weather Service, and we're also really trying to craft the message, communicate it accurately, and oftentimes there is one name at the bottom, and it really is that one person that's making a lot of the final decisions. But sometimes it is really a team effort, especially if it's during the day. And folks like James Franklin, who's the branch chief for the Hurricane Specialist Unit, and maybe Ed Rappaport, our deputy director, or Rick Knabb, our director, they might actually come and help us craft that message. And again, it's kind of team effort. We really try to proofread those products, and it's one of those things that it's kind of like a newsroom. It's frantic trying to get all that out at the last minute. So there are occasionally, unfortunately, there are some typos and errors that end up out there. But we really try to, minimize that, reread our products and craft the message, because it really is key, I think, in communicating it accurately. Not only just putting out all the products, but really communicating it well.
So it's like FedEx. The clock is always ticking.
The clock is always ticking. We actually have a couple of big clocks right on the wall. One's in local time. One's in UTC or Z time that we really work on there. And you are well aware of that clock because that conference call occurs exactly that hour before the advisory is released. So you have to have the first cut of the track done by then. It doesn't mean you can't make changes. And that's one thing I think people don't realize too, is sometimes when those products come out right on time, we may have had to make a big change. There could be a aircraft data that comes in and says, this storm is really 10 knots stronger. And it forces us to have to go in and make those real quick changes at the last minute. Sometimes when storms even over the open ocean, maybe we're not real sure where it's located because it's at night and we don't have visible satellite imagery. We'll wait for one of these polar orbiting satellites. Maybe you may have heard of microwave imagery. And if we get that piece of information, maybe we want to wait till as close as we can to the deadline. If that piece of information comes in and we figure out where it's really 30 or 45 miles east of where we think it is, we're going to go in there and make those changes, and that might delay the process a little bit. So when you're hitting refresh, understand it's us trying to put out the best product that we can, the most accurate product, and sometimes it just takes those extra few minutes to get that done. I tell you, some of the toughest calls we make are actually when to start a system and when to name a system and maybe when to upgrade a system. We want to make sure we want to make the right call and get it right. When there's various criteria for us to start advisories, and a system needs a well-defined center, it needs organized convection, and sometimes it's a very subjective term. What is organized convection? And so there sometimes can be a lot of discussion behind the scenes from a among various forecasters, some of our management staff, and sometimes it's kind of a collective decision on when to exactly start advisories on a system. And so it can be, I think those are some of the really difficult decisions. And then, of course, sometimes the naming decision, because it's very difficult after the fact to take back a name if we make the wrong call. So you really want to get that right. And, if the storm's over the open ocean, there's very limited data. And even when there's aircraft, you want to make sure that the data that you're using to name the storm is accurate. And we want to get it right. And so I think some of those are the really tough calls. The watches and warnings can be a tough call, but oftentimes they're really kind of, they're based on the forecast. Sometimes I always feel that watches and warnings maybe aren't quite as tough a call as some of these other ones, because again, it's kind of based right off the forecast. Now, there can be tough calls on what type of watch and warning to issue, whether or not we think it's going to strengthen. Do we need the hurricane watch? Or maybe it's not going to strengthen. Is tropical storm watch or warning going to suffice in that case? And some of those can be tough calls. And again, some of that's done. Coordinate some with our management, and also with the local offices around the country. People don't understand their storm surge risk. Dr. Jay Baker presented this week, and you hear it time and again, that most people, when they think about hurricanes, they're focusing on the wind and the category of the storm. And I think we really have to get people away from that. We have to get people focused on what is the greatest potential for loss of life in that storm surge. We've seen it time and again now in the last decade with Ike, Katrina, Sandy last year, Isaac this year. That surge is a really big killer. And I think it's going to take a lot of folks to help us communicate that message. It's not just the Hurricane Center. It's going to take the media. It's going to take the emergency managers and everyone to really keep that message out there in the public's forefront so they hear this. And the Hurricane Center, we are working towards I think some solutions that will help us down that path, and that is issuing storm surge watches and warnings, so actually warning for the hazard that does kill a lot of people, and that highlight what the folks that live along the coast in a storm surge warning need to do, and that is listen to their local emergency managers, and when they call an evacuation order, it's time to leave. And then people that live away from the coast that are in well-built homes can ride out a storm, hide from the wind, and we want the people to run from the water. And maybe by lessening the amount of people evacuating, it gives those people along the coast really the opportunity to have this targeted evacuation for the people that really need to get out away from a storm. But I really even hear it this week at this conference. You keep hearing about how much people emphasize the category and also the wind threat. I think we're making progress on people, and unfortunately there's been a lot of sad reminders in the last decade about the surge threat, but I think that's where we need to go.